All right, let's dive into one of the most famous miracles in history, the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to walk through Matthew chapter 14, verse by verse, to really get the context, the incredible scale, and the deep meaning behind this whole event.
So the story kicks off not with a big spectacle, but with a retreat. As verse 13 says, Jesus goes off by himself to a remote place. He's actively trying to get away. But the reason why he's doing this, well, that sets the whole emotional stage for the miracle to come.
So this first part is all about a retreat that gets interrupted. In verses 13 and 14, we learn that Jesus has just gotten some absolutely devastating news. John the Baptist has been executed. And this wasn't just some political news. For Jesus, this was deeply, deeply personal. He was trying to get away to grieve.
And here's why it was so personal. John wasn't just another prophet. He was family. We know from the Gospel of Luke that their mothers, Mary and Elizabeth, were relatives. So Jesus is mourning the brutal death of his cousin, his friend, and the man who literally paved the way for his entire ministry. But he doesn't get a moment of peace. His private grief gets interrupted almost immediately. As verse 13 tells us, word gets out about where he's gone. A huge crowd, just desperate for healing and hope, literally chases after him, leaving their homes to follow him on foot into this desolate place. His time to be alone is over before it even starts.
And right here in verse 14, we see this incredible turning point. In the middle of his own sorrow, the second Jesus sees this crowd, he's moved with compassion. His own grief just gets pushed aside because he's so concerned with their suffering. He doesn't tell them to go away, he immediately starts healing their sick.
Okay, so this brings us to our next part, an impossible command, which covers verses 15 through 17. Because as the day starts to end, the same compassion that led Jesus to heal everyone now creates a whole new, very practical problem. How on earth are they going to feed all these people?
His disciples see the problem, and they come up with what seems like the only logical solution. I mean, it's getting late, they're in the middle of nowhere, so they tell Jesus, hey, send everyone home so they can go to the villages and buy some food. It's a totally reasonable plan, right? It's based on reality.
What's really interesting, though, is that the Gospel of John gives us a little more insight here. In chapter 6, it says that before the disciples even bring it up, Jesus turns to Philip and asks him, where are we going to buy bread for all these people? And John tells us Jesus only asked this to test his faith. Of course, Philip does the math and realizes it's completely impossible.
And this is what they're working with. After they take stock of everything they have, their entire food supply is a young boy's lunch. 5 little barley loaves and 2 small fish. I mean, come on, that's barely a snack for one person, let alone a crowd of thousands. The whole situation is just almost laughable.
But then, in verse 16, Jesus just completely flips the script on them. He challenges their scarcity mindset with this totally impossible command. First he says they don't need to leave, and then he puts it right back on them. You give them something to eat. He's basically daring them to look past what they can see and to trust him instead.
So that brings us to the climax of the miracle in verses 18 and 19. Faced with this impossible task, Jesus doesn't just snap his fingers and make food appear. No, he follows this very deliberate, very orderly process that turns this whole moment into a powerful lesson.
Let's look at these 4 distinct actions. First, he brings order out of potential chaos by having everyone sit down. Second, he takes the tiny amount of food they actually have. Third, he looks up to heaven, making it clear where the blessing is coming from. And fourth, he blesses the food, breaks it, and then gives it to the disciples to hand out. He's the source, but he's making them part of the solution.
Now for the result in verses 20 and 21. What happens next isn't just that people get a little snack. No, it's an overwhelming, mind-blowing feast of abundance that completely shatters the disciples' fears about not having enough.
The wording here is so simple, but so powerful. It doesn't just say they ate a little bit, it says they all ate and were filled. Everybody ate until they were totally satisfied. Out here in a deserted place with nothing, a massive feast just happened.
Then, in verse 21, Matthew gives us the official head count to make sure we understand the sheer scale of this. He writes that there were about 5,000 men. That number alone is just staggering.
But as huge as that number is, the text throws in this one tiny detail that's so easy to miss, a detail that completely changes the scope of what just happened.
That's right. The 5,000, that was just counting the men. So when you add in all the women and children who were there too, the actual number of people fed that day could have easily been 10,000, 15,000, maybe even 20,000 people. The scale of this miracle is just immense.
And if that wasn't stunning enough, get this.
After every single person had eaten their fill, the disciples went around and collected the leftovers. And they gathered 12 full baskets of broken pieces, way more than the 5 loaves and 2 fish they started with. There wasn't just enough, there was a massive surplus.
And that number 12 is no accident. It's hugely symbolic. It represents divine completeness, and it echoes the 12 tribes of Israel, which is a way of saying that this provision is for all of God's people. And of course, there were 12 disciples who are learning right then and there that with Jesus, there is always more than enough.
Now, a miracle this big was unheard of, but the idea of a miracle like this wasn't totally new. This whole event fits into a pattern of God providing for his people that everyone there would have recognized from the Old Testament.
I mean, think about it. The Old Testament is full of these stories. You've got Moses and the manna from heaven in the wilderness. You have Elijah helping a widow whose oil and flour never ran out during a famine. And then there's the prophet Elisha, who performed a miracle that sounds incredibly similar to this one.
So let's just put them side by side. Elisha fed 100 men with 20 loaves of bread. Pretty amazing, right? But Jesus fed over 5,000 men, plus all the women and children, with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. In every single category, the number of people, how little they started with, and how much was left over, Jesus' miracle just blows Elisha's out of the water.
So what's the ultimate point of all this? This wasn't really about feeding hungry people lunch. This was a massive, living object lesson. By providing physical bread out in the wilderness, Jesus was showing everyone a much deeper truth about who he was, that he is the true spiritual food, the bread of life, who can satisfy the deepest hunger we have.
And that's what I want to leave you with. That crowd, they came to Jesus because they were physically hungry, but by meeting that need in such a spectacular way, he was pointing to a much deeper, more universal hunger that's inside all of us. What do you think that hunger really is?